Hi, everybody. It's good to see you again. And welcome to Unit 3, Research. So I'm going to post two videos to help introduce you to the research component of our class. And then also to give you some instruction on how to do research. And so you'll do research in two places. One is just on the wide open web, and the other place is the library. I know. It exists in the digital world, in the virtual world, even though you can't physically go there in person. So first, let me just introduce to you the concept of research as it relates to this class. When we talk about the appeal to logos, that includes using evidence, and that evidence comes in the form of maybe research that other people have done, so scholarly publications like books and articles that appear in the library, but it also comes in the form of testimony and evidence that may be collected in the form of primary research, right? So someone going out and collecting data as you would if you were doing a science project. And then putting that data into some kind of digestible form so that it could go into a paper or an article or a persuasive argument. And so that's kind of like the basic concept of how research is used in writing, right? Other people figure things out however they might figure them out, whether that's going around and making observations like Jessicapedia did in the Cultural Appropriation of Food article. It might include interviewing community members like Allie Joseph did in the Moana article. It might include doing a science project like I referenced where you count the number of people that have been tested for coronavirus and compare that to the number of people in the community and use that statistical information to run an analysis to determine how many people might have the virus. And then that research then can go into some kind of persuasive argument that maybe the government needs to make in order to convince people to stay at home, right? So those are all the ways that research can be used. In terms of how you're going to use research in this class, it's a little bit different, right? Basically, I'm going to ask you to research something that's interesting to you. I'll give you an idea of what that looked like for me. All right. So many of you know, as I've kind of talked about before, I did my graduate research in West Africa, where I went to a city called Bamako, Mali, which is near Senegal, to investigate a question. I came up with the question. Okay, so I basically was interested in a few different topics. Those topics included creative writing, because as you know, I'm also a writer. It included the use of indigenous languages in formerly colonized places. So, West Africa had been colonized by the French, but before the French showed up, other people, they spoke another language or languages that they used before colonization. And then French became really kind of like an entrenched thing in their everyday life. And so all of these things kind of were shaking around in my head. Another thing that I was interested in is the fact that people in West Africa didn't historically write. They were an oral culture, so they didn't really use the written word to communicate. Instead, history was passed down orally. So all these things I thought were really interesting, but they're barely even a topic, right? Much less a question. And so I couldn't exactly write a research paper just on like all these topics or ideas that I was interested in. And so over the course of my first year in graduate school, I had to take my ideas and my interests and narrow them down into a question. And not just any question, a question that I could feasibly answer in the limited amount of time and space that I had, right? And so I couldn't just ask a very broad question because I might not have been able to answer it in the 100 or so pages that I wrote for my thesis and the 3 months that I had to do research. So I had to take my topic, which was really, really broad, narrow it down to a series of questions, and then find that one question that I could answer in the space that I had available. And that question ended up being, Malian writers prefer to write in French, or do they prefer to write in their native language? The answer of which is irrelevant for this class, but but that's what I ended up researching. And so you can see how it went from this like very kind of broad topic and then got narrower and narrower and narrower until it was something that I could conceivably find an answer for. And so that's what you're going to be doing over the next 4 or 5 weeks. I essentially just want you to think about things that are interesting to you, hopefully related to kind of the meat of what we've been talking about in this class. So I like to think that in this class, we spend a lot of time talking about topics that are relevant to our contemporary lives, right? So we talk about gender identity. We talk about racial politics and identity. We talk about climate change. We talk about cultural appropriation, right? All of these things that are really kind of part and parcel of things that should concern us in our everyday contemporary lives. And so when you're thinking about the topic that might interest you, I'd like you to kind of focus on something that maybe is relevant to you in your contemporary life. It doesn't, I'm not going to hold you to it. If you find something really interesting that maybe isn't super relevant as like a current event, we can talk about it. But that's kind of what I want you to think about. And this is purposefully vague in terms of what I'm asking you to do, because I don't want to assign you a topic that you're not interested in and then make you go do research on it. Instead, I want you to think of something that's interesting to you and then work through it with me and with the class to narrow the topic down to a question that you can conceivably answer in a 1,500 word paper. That's the maximum limit of how long this paper should be. So maybe 5 pages, not very long. In the scheme of things, if you're incorporating the research that other people have also done. All right. And so yeah, when I think about what I'm asking you to do, what I'm asking you to do is just consider all of the things that are going on in your life and the world around you that maybe are interesting to you. We're going to read for Tuesday some examples of student papers that some of my students last semester wrote. One of my students was really interested in the topic of fast fashion and, making clothes overseas very cheaply and then selling them in the United States. Quite a few students actually were interested in criminal justice reform and injustices in the criminal justice system, racial disparity and stuff like that. A lot of students were interested in immigration, climate change. But then we also had some students who were interested in video games and digital identity in video games. Other students that were interested in representation on social media, or like momagers and Kim Kardashian and Kris Jenner and how that has created this world of influencers. So a lot of really interesting topics. And so students came to class around this time last semester with just a vague kind of broad topic. And that's what I'm asking you guys to do. I think it's for next Tuesday, is to come to class with an idea of a topic you might be interested in researching. And then we're going to go through the work of taking that very large topic and narrowing it down. Okay. What does it mean to do research? What it means to do research is to become really familiar with a topic, and then to answer a question using the scholarship that's already been done about that question. All right. So, for example, you'll read, or you did read, the Redskins article, Insult and Brand, right? And so the author of that article was introducing an opinion, and to support that opinion, he used scholarship from various sources that explained, for example, the damage that is done when people are discriminated against, or when slurs are used to describe a population. And the research demonstrated that can have serious effects on self-esteem, on substance abuse, on positive outcomes, life outcomes like education and how much money someone is able to make. And so he used that research to help prove his point, right? So thinking about our students last semester, one student wrote or hypothesized that that influencers on social media were using their kids to create a web presence and that it was negatively affecting their children, right? They didn't go and interview the children to determine whether or not those kids were negatively affected by being on social media. Instead, they researched what psychologists were saying about child development, right? And used that to support their hypothesis. So we're going to have 2 presentations that follow this one. And it's going to be a lot of video content, but you can go over it over the course of this week. The first presentation is going to give you an idea of just how to use the World Wide Web. And what I mean by that is just the open free web. So when you open up Google and you search something and you can read it, whether it's on, somebody's personal website or like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, just the open web, right? Those are generally not places that you will go when you're finding scholarly research for your research paper, but they are places that you might want to go to get to know the topic that you're going to research, right? For example, my students that wrote us about social media spent a lot of time reading, different Instagram websites and people.com stories and TMZ stories about influencers and stuff like that before they went to those heavier psychology journals. The other place that you'll do research is the library. And the library is a place where it's a little bit less familiar, right? And I'm not saying that you guys don't use the library. Of course you use the library, but it becomes important to really learn how to navigate the different sites that you might want to use and to find access to the articles that are helpful for you. If you put, criminal justice reform into the search bar in the Loyola Library website, you're going to find 30,000 results, right? And so we need to think of strategies for how to narrow that search down so that you can do effective research. So I'll have 2 presentations coming up that I'll share with you. The first is about how to use the World Wide Web to do research. And then the second is more specifically how to use the Loyola Library to do research. So without further ado, I will disappear and then reappear without Elliot again. I'm sorry, he's watching TV right now. In order to give you an idea of how to start doing research. Okay, so in between this video and the next one, just start thinking about what topics might be interesting to you, and then we'll go from there. Okay, bye. See you in a second.